So while everyone's coming in, I'd like to invite the moderators and the speakers for this for the first session to come on stage. So again, welcome to the afternoon session of Glaucoma 360. We had a very exciting morning where we heard updates on what's going on in the development of glaucoma devices as well as drug delivery. And we have an equally exciting session for you this afternoon, mostly focused on pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. Now, our first session, I'm sure, is going to answer the question that many of you have out there with all of your burning ideas on how to cure glaucoma, and that is on how to translate ideas into breakthrough therapies. So our moderators for the first session are Dr. Adrian Graves, who is co-chair and co-founder of Glaucoma 360, and Dr. Malika Hook, who's a professor of ophthalmology at the University of Colorado. Welcome.
Really excited about getting this session started. It's the first time that we do something like this at the meeting, and I thought it was really appropriate to get as many innovative people as possible on the stage at the same time to go through the fundamentals of starting a company. What do you do when you have the idea, and then how do you walk through all the important steps? In addition to that, we also have panelists that can comment from experience, and we have a lot of deep experience with the panel. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to start off, and if I can ask John Berdal to come up and start with the first talk. Each speaker will have 6 minutes. We'll go through all of the talks, and then we'll have a long period of question and answer, and I'll introduce the panelists after the final talk. So John Berdal from Vance Thompson Vision, talking about, I have an idea, what do I do next, basically?
All right, thanks. So you have an idea, now what? Here's my financial disclosures. The most important, pertinent one is Equinox, but expert opinion in Melt as well. So it all starts here with an idea that a doctor has, but most ideas end up like this. And so this talk is intended to prevent DWIs, which is doctors with ideas that don't do anything about it. And this is kind of the playbook on how to get from here to there. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about risk for a second. And so a couple of years ago, this billboard was everywhere across San Francisco. And when you have an idea and you're standing for something that's different, whether you agree with it or not, it has risk, emotional risk. Colin Kaepernick could have been playing in the Super Bowl last week, and he wasn't. And it's financial risk, and it's reputational risk. And those things seem theoretical until they become real, because people are judging whether or not your idea and your approach is sound. So let's go through the steps. So the first thing is lightning strikes and you have an idea. My idea happened when I was scuba diving with my family down 30 feet, thinking that glaucoma wasn't just a disease of eye pressure, but a balance of intraocular pressure and intracranial pressure. And so what do you do next? Well, first thing you do is determine if it's a good idea. You don't want to pursue a bad idea, and Gene Dewan up here taught me that a good idea is two things. It's both interesting and important. And I'm interested in about everything, but important really matters too, and important means that it's filling an unmet need and that there's actually a market for it. You also have to determine your motivation. If we knew how tall this mountain was before we started climbing it, we probably wouldn't start climbing it in the first place. And so what I specifically mean about this is if your idea you wake up with every morning and you can't get it out of your head, then you probably have enough motivation to scratch that itch and go for it. And then finally, find mentors. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but like the late Rand Allingham here, who was so instrumental in helping me pursue this idea. Then you should probably protect the idea. That's not what I did, so we'll come back to that. So do proof of concept science, and here you really need to be really honest. You need to be honest throughout this whole process. Honest with yourself, honest with your investors, honest with the science, and go and try and do real science, because you're really trying to put a bullet in this idea and see if you're wrong, then don't spend time on it. And then find additional mentors and do the work. So The late Doug Johnson was an important mentor for me on this, and so was Tom Samuelson and Dick Lindstrom. And they asked more practical questions of me. They said, hey, I believe that this may be true with intraocular pressure and intracranial pressure, but so what? What are you going to actually do about it? And so then my partner Vance, we'd spend a bunch of time in the office ping-ponging ideas back and forth, trying to decide, hey, what can we do with this new understanding to actually treat people that have glaucoma? And then this ended up being our idea that we could either pressurize the eye and raise the eye pressure, or depressurize the environment around the eye and lower the pressure in the eye. And here what I want you to think about is you should really protect the idea. And Reza Zadnow taught me that intellectual property and patents are swords and not shields. What does that mean? You're not trying to prevent somebody from doing exactly what you do with your patents. You're really trying to protect a space so that people can't do things that are similar to what you're doing. And another great piece of advice that I have is develop the intellectual property outside before you start the company, and then license it to the company for a royalty. Because as founders, over time, you can get diluted out of meaningful equity in your company, because it can take tens of millions to hundreds of millions to develop a product. And that's happened repeatedly. And so if you have an interest, you can avoid being diluted, and I think that that's a helpful piece of information. Then you got to read, and if you're a doctor, we're reading stuff that we don't know anything about. How are venture deals structured? How do you execute on a business? How do you stay focused? And these are some of the books that were important to me along the way. And then you want to fail fast and cheap. So the first set of goggles that we created, I bought off Amazon, put a bunch of tubes on them, and went to see if we could actually lower eye pressure with them. And so you really want to think about, how can I get to the answer of this is go or no go at every milestone along the way. And then pathways are critical. Not just the FDA pathway and how you're going to get an FDA approval, but also the reimbursement pathway. From the regulatory standpoint, I found that the FDA is, really helpful. They say, this is what we need to approve your product. And then your job is to go out there and do that and engage with payers early to understand what is it that they're willing to pay for, because oftentimes, and usually now, the reimbursement bar is higher than the regulatory bar. And then finally, build a team. And I think this is the most vulnerable part for me. You have all of these people that say, hey, I believe in you and I believe in your idea, and I'm going to dedicate the best part of my life to pursuing this idea. And as an entrepreneur, what I really want to do is deliver on the trust that team puts in me, and see if we can make an idea a reality. So in summary, you have to have a real market, a real unmet need. You want to use your intellectual property to create moats. You have to be motivated every day to come and slog it out, find the right mentors, and then ultimately you do need money to accomplish all of these things. So the question is, what are you going to do with your idea and try to make it a reality? Thanks a bunch.
Thanks so much, John. You not only had an idea, you had a very out-of-the-box idea, and I'll admit I thought it was a little nutso when I first heard it. So thank you for persevering and for showing us your roadmap. Before we go on now, I would like to ask the AV people to turn our clock on. I guess now it's on. So our next speaker is Reza Zadnow. He was CEO of Avedro, now Glaukos. I think he asked himself this question many times over the years and answered it successfully. I have a prototype, now what? Reza?
Good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be here and talk about innovation. As you see, the title is, you have a prototype, now what? The short answer is you need to raise capital. But in order to raise capital, there are a number of questions that need to be answered. And at this point, we assume this is a medical device because it's a prototype. Prototype in pharmaceutical is more difficult, so focus is on medical devices. And John explained, I assume you have already filed the patents and you have experts around you and can help you guide through this process. The first question is, who benefits from this product? Is it the patient? Is going to make the outcomes better? It sounds logical. It should be a good product. But I'm going to talk more focus about some of the pitfalls. It's not always easy to raise capital if the product has better outcome for patients. One asks why not. It's very difficult if today you have a very good idea, for example, for a monofocal cataract lens, which has better outcomes to raise capital because you're competing with products that are there and already established. Is the product better for the provider? Is it reducing the time of surgery? Is it faster, or is it better economics for the physician? Again, the answer is not always evident because sometimes you are adding cost to the procedure, and who is going to pay for that? Is this requiring additional capital that makes the procedure easier? Is this product beneficial for payers? Again, both whether you're working products which are beneficial for providers or payers, sometimes clinical study designs are more difficult to show performance difference. For a patient, that's the easier clinical studies that you can design. Is it beneficial for the company? Are you reducing cost? We can go through a number of examples, but these are probably better product. These are called incremental improvements. These are better done at a larger company, a company that already exists. It's very hard to go raise capital for a product that reduces cost. Is this product satisfies everyone? These are generally the more exciting, but the more difficult, and this is where most investors are interested in. High risk, high benefit. You need to have a very clear path because the patient, provider, payer, and the cost of goods are generally unclear in this product, but these are the ones that are the most exciting projects. Now we're talking about parties involved. What do the regulators think? What is the history with the FDA on similar products? What are the regulatory paths? Is this product going to be paid by the patient, or you need to go after reimbursement depending on every path? It's a different story. What do the investors thinking of this space? Is this something that a lot of investors lost a lot of money in it? Are they skeptical about the space? What do the providers? The good news about ophthalmology is ophthalmologists are generally fast adopters of new technologies. It's not the same in other sectors. So you also need to know, are providers interested in new technologies or new solutions? Where is the talent pool? For example, if you have a product that requires a lot of software in the Bay Area, it's very hard to compete with a lot of tech companies to hire software engineers. And what do the strategics think? Are you developing a product that's going to cannibalize the market of a large corporation? It would be very hard to compete. Unless you are expanding the market, it would be very hard to raise capital. So once you have gathered, these are some of the critical points in those topics we talked about. Now we look, so what are we going to do with it? There are few steps in this process. You go from a concept phase to development phase to clinical, then you get approval, your revenue, and profitability. In the concept phase, again, these are rough numbers depending on the product. You need about $2 to $5 million. In the development phase, $10 to $40 million. The clinical study, $20 to $50 million approval, and you can read the rest. Now, what is critical when you want to go raise capital? And we come back to this first question. You have a prototype, now what? Sometimes you actually do not need a prototype. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars to make a prototype. If you have a credible person who's telling the story and has experience, it carries more weight than any best prototype if you want to go raise capital on the concept phase. But you need to have that clear path. I mean, think of a founder as somebody who has a vision, has seen all the way through the target, but the secret is to come back and define the path that you saw as an entrepreneur to the investors and also to the employees. And if you clearly define that path, that is what people want to know about the risk. In the development, again, many of these are common in different phases, but this is where people focus. When you get into development, the team becomes extremely important. The timelines become important. On the clinical phase, the strategy, because clinical phase is the most expensive part of your company. You're going to go spend millions of dollars. If the product is approved, that is what you're going to be selling. So you better have the right strategy in the clinical study. And then revenue, that's where metrics come into account. Most of the companies at that phase want to go public. It has a lot of analytics and metrics. And then profitability, now people look for growth. Once you have all of that, you define the path. It's important to invest in people, know your story. Depending on what your story, you have to see whom are you going to tell the story to angel investors, to institutional investors, to family offices. It really depends what your story is. Your story may be just sell your patent. Raise capital and do not focus on dilution, and make sure you raise capital and money from people who have experience. Thank you very much.
So my take-home message from that, Reza, is next time I have an idea that I'm pitching to you, I don't need anything. You're just going to trust me, right? I don't need a prototype. So just to remind everybody, we're going to have a long question and answer period. So if you have any questions, get them ready, and there are microphones in the aisles here for you to use. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, and I wish I had a half hour to do this. Jean Dewan, if you can come up to the podium, he'll be speaking about I have funding, now what? And for those of you, for the one or two people in the audience who might not know Jean, in IT you have people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and I think Jean Dewan in ophthalmology really is our Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. I don't know what to say to that. I'm maybe getting close to Bill Gates' age, but so this is really good. I have funding now. Okay, I've never been able to really say that. It's just it's always it's always a search. So I have what now? So what's the first job? Obviously, the first job is to prepare the company for the next round of funding. What's the second job? Refer to the first job. That's really true. Every step that has been outlined and talked to everybody is about getting that funding and then getting the next part of the funding, meaning that you've achieved an important milestone. Now, I may make some comments here. What's the purpose of VC funds? To enhance the world, to provide care to the poor, to do all of these things. Actually, it's to return money to their limited partners. They can't do anything unless they make a lot of money, because they take on a lot of risk. And just to understand that they are, in a way, a lot of people partner, and they're good VCs, and they're even tougher VCs, but the really good VCs make so much money that there's a little bit left over for you. So how do we make money for VCs? What are the early steps? Well, obviously reducing risk, and you've heard that word now several times. You need to reduce risk before they're going to give you more money. The financial expenditure increases with actually reducing the risk as the programs go. Risk must decrease if you want to progress the program. So, design, think, prototype, test is really what you need to do. You need to show whatever you have is working, hopefully before the money runs out. How do you do that? There are a few things that you really need to think hard about. Does it really solve the clinical need? I think I've seen some things here that I really liked, and there's some other things that I thought, like John said, were really interesting. But interesting is not enough. It has to matter. It has to be important. Does it work? In vitro, it's exciting and interesting, but not enough to really move the needle. Animal models, there are some that really seem to predict clinical result, and there are others that have more difficulty presenting the clinical result. Human experience is what drives the needle. So when I start a company, I'm really looking to how do I get validation in patients? Is the IP sound? It's always important, always complicated. It's rarely useful, and I hear this sometimes. Well, that issued IP, it's just not going to hold up. I think that's a bad strategy. Is the form attractive? Do doctors really like it? Do patients like it? Do payers like it? Costs go up as the risk reduces. In other words, as you get further along in these clinical programs, they just become immensely more expensive. The risk, every time you go to a new stage, you're very likely not to make it through. I love this valley of death. This is, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So pick one. Failing early. I've heard this so much, and it's a large company perspective. It's not what we can do in a little company. Thomas Edison, our greatest weakness is giving up. I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention of 1,000 steps. Anybody who's been in that understands how true that part of it is. Failing early is fine if you plan on failing. Success means not failing. A small company cannot afford to fail early. Investors can't afford to fail late. Overall, this is a drug development thing going. You have a 50% chance of getting through a phase 2. Overall, the success rate from a drug to a clinical approved outcome, about 1 in 100. So how do we make sure we don't fail late? It's not quite the same as not failing early. If you don't start if you're going to fail. Just don't start if you're going to fail. Make sure you're going to succeed. It's a mentality. You have to learn, you have to plan to learn. All startups learn. All startups have to refocus. All startups have to pivot, at least in my experience of over 10 startups. So I use this beautiful, let the data drive you, young entrepreneur. So I love this. This is one of my favorite cartoons in the whole world. Okay, I admit it. We're lost, but the important thing is to remain focused on whose fault it is. You need to face your bad results. You need to get that advice from those that have been there. Don't panic. It's really easy to panic. Don't blame. It's easy to blame. If you don't panic and you don't blame and you think about it, there's almost always a path out. Thanks.
I think you can see why Gene's our ophthalmology guru. Now I'd like to introduce someone else who needs no introduction, Wiley Chambers of FDA, who's talking about something that he knows a little bit about, navigating the regulatory gauntlet. Wiley.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. First, my disclaimer. These are my views, not necessarily those of the Food and Drug Administration's. And I am prohibited by law from having any financial interests, and so I don't. Let me start off with the mission of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and that is to assure that safe and effective products are available to the American public. It is not our goal to turn down products. It is our goal to try and approve products that are safe and efficacious. Yes, we are a gatekeeper, but that's not our goal. What the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and or the Public Health Service Act do is they prohibit interstate transport of unapproved products. So they block anybody from transporting products that aren't approved, require substantial evidence of safety and efficacy as the basis of approval, but then permit a pathway reviewed by the FDA so that products can proceed along that pathway to get approved. One of my biggest frustrations is for people to do something that they think the FDA wants them to do when the company doesn't think it's necessary and the FDA doesn't think it's necessary. All that does is waste resources. If I leave you with no other message, I want you to ask why you're doing things if you think it's just because the FDA wants it. If you have a reason, fine. But if you don't have a reason, don't do it just because you think the FDA wants you to do it. And so to give some examples, I'm going to go through a typical IOP lowering, some various basic aspects of an IOP lowering trial, and explain why we ask for those things. So why do we ask for adequate and well-controlled trials? Well, we do so because the law says that substantial evidence has to come from adequate and well-controlled investigations. Can't come from anything else. It can't come from hearsay. It can't come because somebody said it was great. If you look at the wording of that, it says investigations. There's an S at the end of investigations. That's where the two trials comes from. If it didn't, we don't know of any other way to have an S at the end except to have more than one. That's the whole basis for having two trials. What is an adequate and well-controlled trial? Well, the federal regulations spell out what is an adequate and well-controlled trial. They don't spell out what's phase one. They don't define for sure what phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 are. We don't really care. We care that the ultimate efficacy and safety be demonstrated in things that are adequate and well-controlled trials. And if it does these 6 things, it meets the federal regulations for what is an adequate and well-controlled trial, and we would accept it. So you hear a lot about we take timolol, latanoprost, travoprost, bimatoprost as acceptable controls. Why do we do that? Because there is data available from multiple other trials to support a non-inferiority margin. And if you're going to compare yourself to something, you need to know how good the control is. We don't have that information on a lot of other products. So we base controls on things we do have that information on. Is the product's vehicle an acceptable control? Well, in IOP lowering, we strongly discourage using the vehicle control. Doesn't mean you couldn't do it, but we strongly discourage it. And we discourage it because we're telling people they need to be on an IOP lowering, and now you're going to tell somebody it's okay for them to go for 12 weeks without that IOP lowering during the trial and another 6 weeks before for a washout period. Why do you think they need to be on a pressure-lowering medication when you just told them it's okay to be off it for 20 weeks? We think that means there's a pre-selection of patients, and those patients are probably not the best patients to be in a trial. So we don't think using a product vehicle is a good idea for a clinical trial for IOP lowering. What is the non-inferiority? Well, the non-inferiority margin is based on those trials that I just said we had in place. And we think the 95% confidence interval showing that you are the same as this other product within 1.5 millimeters, recognizing we only generally measure IOP in full millimeters. That was the original way it was done. And the majority of the time be within 1 millimeter. We think if you are within that margin, you're the same. And so you can use that efficacy information. Can you use generic timolol, latanoprost, travoprost, bimatoprost solutions? The approved generics in the United States have the same active ingredients, same inactive ingredients, and the same concentrations. Why wouldn't we allow those to be used? And so we do. Why do we ask for comparisons in the morning? We don't actually ask necessarily for comparisons in the morning. What we ask for is that you compare the peak and the trough times for both the test product and the control. And if you're going to use timolol, timolol's peak time is about 2 to 4 hours afterward. So we want a 2 a.m. or 2 hours afterward measurement so that we get the peak of timolol. Why do we ask for the late afternoon? Same reason. We want the trough. And typically the trough of many products is in the late afternoon. And so if your product has a trough in the late afternoon and/or the controls in the late afternoon, that's why we ask for it. If that's not the case, if there's not a peak or trough, we don't ask for those time points. We don't ask for 2 hours if your product doesn't peak then. Why do we measure 2 weeks? Because that's the longest time that we think somebody would wait until to make sure their product works. Why do we ask for 6 weeks? Because we want washouts to be completely washed out. Why do we go for 12 weeks? Because we've never seen a product fail at 12 weeks that didn't continue to have efficacy afterward. Can you treat one eye or both eyes? You're going to use it ultimately in both eyes, so we want it studied in both eyes. And there are methods to do that. I'm out of time, so I'm going to quickly go through. We like things measured in both eyes. You can use both eyes as long as the eyes are similar, and we define that as being within 5 millimeters. Again, my main point is there are reasons behind everything we ask for. So if you don't know the reason, please ask. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Wiley. And I'd like to introduce the last speaker for this session before going to panel, Tom Mitro, COO of ARRI. He's going to bring it all home for us and give us tips for success.
Well, first I'd like to thank Malik and Adrian for giving me a topic that I'm quite familiar with, that is trenches. I think many of you would say that I've been in a trench most of my career.
Stop.
So I'm quite comfortable there. Anyway, some of the things we've learned along the way. Number one, hire the best, not the most affordable. You know, small startup companies may not have all the money in the world, so this may sound a little counterintuitive, but you absolutely have to get the best. Companies have to be quick, have to be very agile, can't afford a lot of missteps. So you better hire the best people you can find. You want people that have done it before, that can hit the ground running, and importantly, can lead your organization through the turmoil that you're going to face, undoubtedly, when you start a company. The last thing on this slide, I'd say, is you got to pay them well. I'm not just talking about loading them up with stock options, but pay them in cold hard cash, because if you don't, somebody else will, and that's about the last thing you want. Second part, virtual companies are sexy, but they're very difficult to manage, especially for a startup. When I joined ARRI, I was employee number 13. We now have over 400 employees, and we're everywhere. We have 150 people or so in the field in the US. The other 250 people are in 5 facilities around the world, 3 in the US, 1 in Ireland, 1 in Japan. So we are everywhere. We're about as virtual as you can get. And that has some real positives. The first positive is our employees appreciate the fact that we don't make them move to a central location. They can live anywhere they want as long as they're near one of our facilities. The second thing is that built a lot of loyalty, and it opens up a tremendous talent pool for us when we go out to recruit. But it comes with drawbacks as well. First one is it's very difficult to build and maintain a company culture when you're in such disparate parts of the world, let alone just the United States. It's also very difficult for departments to build an esprit de corps and keep people on the same page when they don't see each other every single day and they're all spread out. And the third thing, you just don't have those very important informal, spontaneous meetings that occur when people run into each other in the hallway and say, hey, I was thinking about you the other day. I've got an idea for you. It doesn't happen nearly as much. A lot of ways to get through those. I'll just give you one idea that we do. Every year, we have an all-employee meeting. So we bring all 400 people to a central location where we could talk about our company culture and reinforce that. We could talk about the things we did in the previous year as well as our objectives for the next year, and importantly, we'll give our employees time to meet with each other so they can develop the relationships deeper with people that they talk to almost every day but rarely see. The third part is make quick starts or match quick starts with quick exits. You know, speed has to be a key asset of a small company. And it has to be a cornerstone of just about everything you do. We at ARRI have a mantra that we commonly repeat to all of our employees to keep urgency in front of their mind. And that mantra is simply right now. It tells people exactly when we want that decision to be made. Now, quick starts usually aren't a problem with the company. People are eager to get in and do it. It's the quick exits. And I heard what Gene said, but what I'd say is it is important, if you're going to fail as early as you can, right? And the key thing there is people don't like to quit early or fail early because it means somebody probably made a mistake. They chose the wrong pathway, whatever it might be. So the problem here is that these exits have a tendency to linger on forever, wasting time and money Two of the critical things small startup companies don't have a lot of. So set those milestones early, bring them forward. Just don't make them milestones, make them no, go, or go decisions, and follow through with them. Number 4, don't let failure get you down. I'm not talking about failure in your company because it's going to happen, right? You're going to have successes, you're going to have failure, you have a win-loss record, no doubt about it. What I'm talking about, don't let failures from other companies in your industry doing primarily the same thing you're doing, don't let their failures get you down. And here's the example I use. When we were developing Rocklatan, our PGA combination product, we heard time and time again from a multitude of people said, what are you doing? Didn't you see the 3 blue bloods in ophthalmology? And I mean that affectionately. Blue bloods in ophthalmology all had a PGA combination product that never got approved from the FDA. What are you doing that for, right? But we believed in what we were doing, we persevered, and importantly, we got and sought advice from the only people that really mattered, and that was the FDA. And as a result, we were the company that got a PGA combination approved. So the point here is you can look around and see them fail. That doesn't mean you're going to fail. Make sure you get the right advice from the right people, believe in what you're doing, and go like the hammers of hell. Last one, build relationships, not enemies. It's kind of a fun one to think about. But ophthalmology is a highly competitive field, full of just highly competitive people in both doctors as well as industry, right? No doubt about that. There's nothing wrong with competition. It's a fantastic thing, unless it boils over and you find yourself committing unsportsmanlike conduct, or you start considering them enemies, not competitors. I know when I joined this industry, I went to Allergan. It's a fantastic company. At that time, the only thing in the world that we hated was Alcon. The good news is, they hated us too. So the feeling was mutual. The point of the matter is it was over the top, right? It was frankly over the top. It's not now, but it was over the top at that point. And the result is we made many mistakes. Quite honestly, so many times we probably spent more time worrying about how we could slow them down versus how we could get our company to prosper, which wasn't good. Secondly, we lost the respect of customers at various times. They would say to us, why are you so worried about them? Why don't you just talk about your own thing and let them go? And the third and most interesting thing, of course, is later on in your career, you'd find that you were working with or for someone that you, in fact, treated with absolutely no respect and you treated as an enemy. And that made for very unchoppy waters for quite a while. My point here is, if you're going to be in this industry for a long time, treat people with respect, not as an enemy. Treat them with respect. You know what might happen? They might return the favor. So those are my thoughts and my tips for things you could learn in the trenches, and here they all are. So thank you very much, and I return the mic to you.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists to begin with, and we have a great set of panelists here, and I want to just go through each one of them. Some of you might not be familiar with all of them because we have some new people to ophthalmology. Jeanette Bankus, who's president and GM Global Surgical Franchise. She's been at Alcon for a little bit less than a year now, so I'm glad that you can join us. A little bit of a different flavor. We have Tak Chung from NEA, and he has a varied background where he was with industry, BNL, AMO on the BD side, and then started a company and now is with NEA Ventures. Mikhail Buchny, who was formerly of Alcon and now head of R&D surgical with Zeiss, and Jag Desange, who's senior VP US Eye Care with Allergan. So you can see we have industry members, and we have people who have venture and startup background. And we're all going to ask each other questions here. So the previous speakers can ask questions or be asked questions, and the panelists can really take it anywhere they want to go with this. I'm going to start with asking Jeanette a basic question that sort of extends what Tom was talking about. You can look at it as the first question is giving pearls for success, or how you would advise startups, some key points to success, or you can take it the other way and say, here are some danger points that you've noticed with some of the startups that have pitched to you or come to you to collaborate in some way. What are some pearls of wisdom you can give from that standpoint? And you have 1 minute to give that pearl. So.
No problem, and I won't try to talk too fast. So excited to be part of this space. Came from Boston for 15 years with a lot of device development from your carotid to your toe. And I've recognized the eye is probably the most important part of the body. So to answer this question, people are sitting there looking at us as strategics saying, how do I actually partner with you? I think the faculty today that presented really took it in a nice, digestible manner. How do you think about an idea and fail or fail fast? And I'll take each area in the minute and say, where have I seen some pitfalls? Number one, John was lucky in the fact that from a patent or freedom to act, you need to get your idea tied up as soon as possible, because as you can imagine, the competitive landscape, if somebody does take your idea, your commercial idea is now somewhere else. So in the early stages, I ask you to think about the IP. I also think you need to think like a business person. If this is a physician coming in, what's the value proposition? And don't be scared. I heard the comments saying, if it's a big strategic and you're competing with them, I've bought companies where I had internal R&D programs and they were going faster and more agile to us. That's number one. Early stages, get it locked up and make sure you're getting a mentor along the way. Stage number two, medium term. I like the fact that there were lots of prototypes, but most folks don't think about design for manufacturing, even internally at companies. And so as we think about COGS, we're continually focused on that at big strategics. You need to be thinking about that as well. And what part of your device, if any, I've bought devices where we couldn't even touch a piece that was so expensive because it was a critical part of the device that made it work. So think about what you're doing there. And then for the last part, on the long term, understand your valuation. I can sit here as Alcon and say, yes, you think we have deep pockets. So does Zeiss, so does J&J, et cetera. But when we look at the market landscape and the attraction around the market and how big that is, many times we don't agree with the person coming in with us. So understand market penetration and what you're really going to get out of that device, then come smart enough to be aggressive with the biggies. So that would be my advice to start.
Thank you. So I have a question for TAC. So you've experienced a number of different aspects of the innovation process firsthand. You've started companies, you've been in BD for strategics, now you're in venture. So which role sucked the most? Let me rephrase that. Can you share some pearls with us about, how have those different experiences helped you to evaluate and invest in technologies?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I got to think about how to answer that first one. So, I think there's a lot of things that I've learned over the years. And really, I think a lot of them have been echoed by the individuals to my right that spoke earlier. In assessing technologies, it's really assessing companies and teams. We think about backing entrepreneurs who have been successful in the past, and that we view that can do, continue to do good things in the future. They choose the right team members, they choose the right markets, they choose the right technologies. That's first, I'd say. Next, sort of, I think this echoes one of Reza's slides, sort of know your customers. Make sure that you understand the patients, the physicians, the FDA, the reimbursers, the potential acquirers, and also the funding sources. Make sure you understand them. I think, as we assess technologies, we think through those very carefully. Further, as I've explored investment, I think investing in what you know is really important. So I invested in 4 new companies last year, one in cardiovascular, one in ophthalmology, one in critical care, and one in orthopedics. And I've known ophthalmology for quite some time, and cardiovascular. I was actually at Edwards Lifesciences for a period of time. Those actually are our best companies so far over the last 12 months. The others, small hiccups, but they'll be okay. But know the markets that you're investing in, and then be humble, actually, on the flip side, right? So obviously, understand what you're looking at and the opportunities, but also be willing to seek out advice from people that know the space better than you.
That's great. Yeah, and one of the things about TAC is that he's also a physician. So when you're talking with TAC about ideas, I work with TAC. I was fortunate enough to get funding from NEA. And when you talk to TAC, he can switch these hats from MD to industry to venture. So if any of you want somebody to talk to about advice when you're starting up a company, just give TAC a call, and I think it'll work out really well. So next question's for Mikhail. Mikhail, I know you've worked with a couple of the big strategics, and you've also integrated some of the technology into big strategics. What are some of those challenges, or any pearl for success or advice that you would give startups? And also from the strategic side, when you're merging a new company into a larger company.
Yeah, I think the important part is, so here's acquisition happening. Kudos go to business development team. Everyone is very happy to move forward. And at this time, I think it's critical to put the right team together on the strategic end, right? And at least the leaders, they need to understand the aspects of the acquisition. They need to know what are the rules of the game, what are the earnouts, what will be driving the company you're acquiring, and what are the long-term objectives of the strategic. And using the language of Simon Sinek, the strategic will have or will aspire to have infinite game. At the same time, obviously, the company you're acquiring, and I assume this will be a good company, they will be highly focused. If they were not focused, they wouldn't get to the acquisition part. They will have very finite game, and you need to reconcile it. And the company, the team which is acquiring and leading the integration needs to be very good and understanding and humble, and get ready for cultural differences between the small company and the company which it acquires. It's not to be underestimated. And to build on Jeanette's pearls, what she brought out, what I dealt personally with things like design for manufacturability, right? If you're a startup, you're not really focused on that. I would say looking at the regulatory aspects, chances are strategic will want to have global presence, and chances are the startup did not have the bandwidth to think about it globally. If you're talking about reliability, in case of devices, this would be something else to look at. And roles, responsibilities is a critical. Who does what?
Great. Just to remind everybody, if you have some questions, we have some open microphones here, so feel free to walk up and we'll call on you. I think Jeanette has a question for the panel.
Okay. So, John, this is a question for you. As you can imagine, the first time you dance in bringing a product or development, it's probably a lot of folks sitting in the room. What do you think was the most cumbersome thing with a large startup? Because it depends on what you think funding source is going to be early on. And it's cumbersome, guys. If you're new to us, how do you actually explore that? Who do you get a hold of? A lot of people try to get a hold of me as the president. We have full BD&L teams. So, John, tell us some of the hiccups you faced. You're very good at it now, but you're experienced.
I think that the hardest thing is not being universally loved and having everybody want to just throw money at you during fundraising. Because as doctors, you're kind of used to that, right? Patients hug you, you make them see better, and there's a one-to-one correlation with taking the cataract out and that patient seeing better, putting in a MIGS device. Then you come and you talk with people, and they're polite, and then they say they don't want to fund your idea. And that is really hard for doctors with ideas. That's the biggest challenge.
Okay, well, I have a question for Jag. So you've been part of a number of successful acquisitions in your role, and you've probably also seen a number of not so successful pitches. So what are some of the pearls you have for entrepreneurs beyond having an innovative technology? How do they seal the deal?
Well, I think for any companies or startups or entrepreneurs who are thinking of bringing a new technology to marketplace, obviously there's a big idea. There's all the faculty have said there's a big idea that's going to be exciting and that's meeting an unmet need in the marketplace for patients or physicians. Unfortunately, that's not going to be enough because there's lots of other different considerations. And if you think about the timeline for bringing a device to market, maybe from the initial idea to commercialization, maybe 5 to 7 years, a drug maybe 7 to 10 years, a lot can change in that period. And I think what you have to realize is what's the reality of the world going to look like in 5 to 10 years' time, and will that technology have the salient need in the marketplace that you thought on day one? And so therefore what you have to really think through, and especially in the environment that we have today, and we heard from David Park this morning about the reality of the economics and payers, is that the regulatory hurdles are there and clear and as outlined already today, but actually getting paid for and having the economics work for the physician or the patient is crucial, and the payer, obviously. So I think that's singularly the biggest change that's happened in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think from that perspective, the ones that are successful versus aren't are having a sustainable sort of view of the environment that is not just going to be good on day one of launch, but actually sustainable for 3 to 5 years. And I think that's really the trick. And in some respects, how do you sort of look at that? If the technology, obviously, if you have an unmet need, there's a standard of care for that unmet need. And if your technology is better than the standard of care for that unmet need, that's an incredibly strong starting point. And then making sure the environment from payers and physician economics and patient economics is going to stand the test of time. If you have those things in line, you're in a really good shot of managing the risks that have been outlined. So
That's great. Yeah. And Mikhail, I think you have a question for Gene.
Yes, I was on your long checklist, very exhaustive checklist, kind of recipe for success. You put, will the payers like it last? I would have thought that's the first question, who pays for this? If you can elaborate on it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important part of thinking of starting in a new area. You know, presumably, if you're going to start a new company, it's going to be meeting an important unmet need. And, you know, I have to believe that if you meet an important unmet need, that somebody will value it. Actually, the way I do it, and looking forward, because I don't know who's going to pay anymore, you know, whether it depends on, you know, I guess who wins the election. But if I would pay, and I think around the world, usually individuals pay, not governments actually. And so if I would pay, then that's how I value it. I do think it's a really important question, but I think it's really connected also with the value.
I have a quick question here for Jeanette, but I'd like the others to comment on it if at all possible. One of the things that we struggle with in startups is trying to figure out when to approach strategic. Everybody has a little bit of a different opinion, from really early, so you get an idea if you're going the right way, is the unmet need really there, to you know, don't meet until you're ready to sell the company. What's your take on that?
I say work with us early on. And, you know, at the end of the day, your idea is your baby. I would ask you to get as many mentors along this journey. I'm part of the Twin Cities, lived in Minneapolis before Fort Worth. And there's a lot of venues by which, whether you need regulatory, clinical advice, et cetera, quite frankly, us big strategics, and I'll let them answer as well, we want you to win. There's no formula in Alcon that says 100% of R&D is going to stay in the house. We actually love the competitive landscape. We love the entrepreneurial and those in startups trying to push us harder and bring things that, quite frankly, we can't do it all on our own. So I would say the earlier, the better. I'll pick on John again because he's working with us on one thing where he's not asking us for anything other than keeping us along the journey and telling us the story and making sure we realize that. I would say that appetite is stronger for us. We're looking and watching what he's doing on things. Come to us earlier on, because all of us will take our industry hats off, and we're in the space we're in. I've been in med devices for years because we love what we do, and we do want to see you win. So whether it's our Alcon hat on or our professional hat off, saying personally we want to see the industry explode, we're there to support you guys. So we want to see you win is my answer.
yeah, the other thing I would also add to that is that you want to be on the journey with the company as well, because you learn things along the way. You know, the inventor or the clinical team or the development team are learning things along the way. And actually, it's good to be on that journey with you to understand how that manifests itself and what detours or roadblocks you've come across and how you've overcome them. Rather than there's a big fait accompli and a reveal of everything, you actually want to go along the journey with you. So it's actually a learning process for the strategic as well to be part of that. And funnily enough, conversations, you know, bear fruit because of that sort of learned understanding over 2-3 years.
So John, just really quick, Jeanette just mentioned working with you on some stuff. Do you feel the love from Jeanette when you're talking to her about the stuff, or?
Not always.
She can be pointed if she needs to be. But, you know, I do think that what she said echoes true. You know, my interaction with top leaders of industry is they know that the profession has to succeed. And when Tom Mitro talked about the respect mutually, I think that that's critically important. But I also think that we get a chance to practice in the best profession in all of medicine. And it's because of all of the, entrepreneurs, doctors, leaders, regulatory that try to take this profession with our most sacred sense and make it the best place to work. And so people really are working together, kumbaya.
Great. Before moving to a question from Adrian Tack, so a little bit of a different angle from you. So when do you advise the startups that you're investing in to approach industries? A little bit different than what you heard from the industry members. What's your advice typically, and what are the points that you look at when you're giving that advice?
Yeah, and I'll answer it along both, when you should approach us and how we think about approaching industry. One, to be honest, every time I see something, I actually call people like the people to my left to see if it's interesting to them before we put in even a dollar. And so when startups are approaching us, I do encourage you to approach us before you think you need money, not just the 6 months it's going to take you to raise, but probably 2 years beforehand. We want to see the technology and help to maybe provide advice and mold it ahead of the time that we would put in capital. Also get to know you better. Frankly, the 4 investments we made last year, everyone we knew more than 5 years. 2 of the firms we knew more than 20 years. So, we want to see the progression over those 18 to 24 months. You did what you said you were going to do, and hopefully it came out positively. And so we encourage the same thing for our startups as well. I know a lot of startups, frankly, there's a startup that we funded last year, $65 million round. There was no press release. The CEO, engineer, great, super great guy, but was trying to keep it quiet. And I said, actually, I think it's okay to be open and talk about it. He was afraid people were going to steal his idea. Look, I worked at a big company for so long. They're so slow. It's going to take them forever to steal your idea anyways.
So you funded a company last year other than mine, and you gave them $65 million, is what I just...
Yeah, well, your $65 million check is coming soon,
Okay,
I know,
all right.
but yeah.
So, Jag, how would you answer that question? When do you want entrepreneurs to approach Allergan?
Well, I think, there's a key comment that Gene was talking about risk. And when is the risk relevant for strategics to get involved? And usually we tend to sort of look early on, but not too early, and then obviously not too late. So sort of Goldilocks sort of approach to looking at where the risk is. And I think you obviously want to see signals, especially in humans, in terms of whether the product can have a benefit, whether it's device or pharmaceutical. And I think from that perspective, you, by definition, the later you leave it, the more that the price may rise. The earlier you go, the more risk there is. And I think one of the things that I think is an important sort of constraint that's looked at is that Gene mentioned sort of decreasing risk. There's also, Gene, I guess, there's a risk of decreasing value if you keep decreasing risk. And I think that's a sort of a tension you have to keep in the development program, because by definition, there may be more risk in the program, but there may be more value in the program as well. You obviously can't go too far on either angle. And I think that's really important to hold because of the tough environment that's out there to basically bring products to market successfully, I think, in this decade. So.
That's great. Yeah, and any audience members, if you have some questions, if you don't come up after this next question that I'm going to ask Tom, I'm going to start calling on you individually to ask some questions. So feel free, really make this as interactive as you want it to be. So
Line on up.
yeah. So Tom, question for you about IPOs. Is it a good idea? What kind of scars do you have? I guess might be another way to say that. But what's the checklist that you go through when deciding, is an IPO the right way to go? Or is there another avenue that would be better for a startup?
Malik, you were talking to me, Tom?
Yes.
God love you. Well, IPOs are certainly a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, you get a chance to get money. You got a chance to have your stock listed on the stock exchange, so you could hopefully, get some appreciation and those sorts of things. That's great. It's a great way to raise money. The downside is, all of a sudden, you're in the public spotlight. And it's not every year that you're in the spotlight. It's every week you're in the spotlight, and clearly every month or every quarter when you release your earnings or lack thereof. So, plus there's all these other requirements that you have compared to if you stayed as just a private company. Right, you've got Sarbanes-Oxley reporting that you've got to do, which is not an inexpensive thing. Costs companies millions to put in what they have to do to meet those requirements. So it's very expensive proposition to go public. It's also a very difficult thing to maintain and something that you have to pay attention to all the time. So my point is, if you are going to go public and you're really committed to it, you got to make sure you really know what you're getting into, because there's no turning back. Once you're public, you can't say, oh, sorry, I'd like to redo that. You can't do that. You're there, and the public eye is on you every step of the way.
So next question for Gene. One thing that's unique about what you've done is forming groups that have been lasting, right? So doing one startup after another. Foresight's a great example of that. Why did you choose to do it that way? And what has kept Foresight going one after the other over the years?
I think the important thing is relationships. Once you work with somebody and you go through that valley of death and you end up on the other side, you understand who do you want to be in the trenches with. And it's really important, and this means in the trenches with the strategic, in the trenches with who you're working with. You don't have. We like to. My partner for 15 years, Angela McFarland. We said last year to each other, we don't have to watch our back. It's really you say what you need to say. You're honest. You appreciate it both ways, and not everybody's going to have a good day every day. And either as an individual or in the company with data. So going with known relationships, they're some of the smartest people that we've worked with over the years. And, I just love it. Actually, I work with Yair Alster. I've done 5 companies with Yair. He's in Israel. We've started 3 companies together in Israel, and part of the reason was how else are we going to pay for come and see each other, and so this is relationships. This is our profession. Like, we enjoy seeing patients, we also enjoy doing this development, and I really kind of put out there. We've had some great relationships, say with Alcon recently, and Roche and Allergan also. But with Alcon recently, it's how does the flea dance with the elephant? You're going to get smashed. They didn't even know that they smashed you, and and you just have to kind of get up. It's hard to kill a flea. And so you have to take that input and that value that they're creating and those relationships, and eventually they also see that they can trust you, and so it's just I guess part of life. I don't have a better thing to say.
So I have a question for Reza. You've had a number of successes from quite some time ago, and as an entrepreneur and scientist, technical person, obviously that's a big plus to investors and other potential companies. But I'm just curious, how does that make you feel sort of internally after you've had these successes? The world looks at you that way. Does that give you more trepidation, like, oh my God, I don't want to have a failure, or does that give you more confidence going for the next one?
Well, first of all, thank you. No, I don't take anything for granted. You have to prove yourself at every project, at every company. I happen to love what I'm doing. So each time I start a project, really, it's with passion. And I have to prove myself. even with your investors, you raise your Series B, in your Series C, like 2 years later, you have to show progress. Of course, you're happy as a team. It's not just you that you have accomplished something together, but every step is a different step.
Yeah, thank you.
Question at the microphone. Just identify yourself and any disclosures that you might have.
Okay. Yes, my name is David Richardson. No significant disclosures. So clearly, everybody in this audience is interested in innovations, and I would imagine that quite a few in the audience have innovations or are thinking of them, myself included. And I would imagine that most everyone up at the table there is interested in these innovations. But I've also noticed that there's no contact information in the information that we have, either in the app or in the paper here. How do we get in touch with you to let you know about our innovations? Because I'm sure you also get quite a few just cold calls, and you'd like to separate those from those people who are interested enough to actually devote the time
Call
to
Malik.
meet with you.
No, what I'm thinking,
Seriously, I look at everything he sends me.
I have a better way, Tack. So if we can start from the other side of the stage, maybe start with Wiley and just give your home phone number.
I'll give you Malik's home phone number.
So
Follow me on Instagram.
Yeah, one question. So it's a great question. And another way to look at it is if there's a resident or a fellow who's thinking about starting in the business, right? So they're clinicians, they might have an idea, they might be an engineer who's getting in. Where do you start? And I think we can maybe start with Jeanette and work our way down. What piece of advice would you have for getting started, even getting off the ground?
Okay. I'll actually answer your question on the contact. All of us are very much on the web, so if you want to get a hold of us, we're either in LinkedIn, et cetera, so we're not, all you got to do is Google our names, so we're very reachable. And I would tell you that from an Alcon perspective, the BD&L group is here. See me after if you need their contact information, but we do what's called speed dating. We have therapeutic areas or focus at the company that we know we're highly interested in. I look at those areas. As a new startup comes into us, whether it be an idea, et cetera, but remember, take my advice, make sure you're buttoned up. With either IP, et cetera, because when you come into Alcon, if you're not, we're also very worried about, we're working on some things, and what if you come into the company and say, but we told Alcon to do that, we're going to protect ourselves as well. We have a whole engineering team that works for the company. But get a hold of us. We do what are called speeds on a weekly basis. If there's something novel that we think, wait, we're interested in, we look at it weekly at the company to make sure we're being agile for you. So we are on the web. BD&L is here for Alcon, so contact us in that manner.
So just for the sake of time, does anybody have another pearl about accessing any of the resources? Senator McHale or TAC, and then I'll take it from there.
I would only suggest to, I think for yourself, it's important to put structured, non-confidential description of your idea, and don't put there as much as you can, but don't put anything confidential.
So one thing I'll just to close up this session.
Actually, let me just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So
I'm always going to listen to you.
No, I apologize. Having been in the corporate role in the venture world, I'd say, from the corporate perspective, actually go as high as you can go. So when I was a BD person, when the CEO got something, we did spend, and those people got calls like an hour later. From the venture side, I'd actually say go a little bit lower, right? So the principals and junior partners are trying to make a name for themselves. They're hunting for deals. So those are the individuals that are going to push your deals. So I'd encourage you actually to go to them. Also go to people that know the space and they're going to feel comfortable in the space. So look at their backgrounds and understand who not only is more likely to do the deal with you, but also can be helpful going forward. And I definitely don't put anything confidential, but do please share more than less. Like the executive summaries are actually not that helpful. Yeah. Definitely send a PowerPoint and sort of like 2 to 3 dozen slides with text. It is really helpful. It saves us a lot of time.
So that piece of advice, TAC actually shared that yesterday. We had coffee together, and I didn't think of it that way, to go to somebody who's maybe a little bit more junior because they're going to be hungrier to bring the deals into the venture group. So I think it's a really good way to think of it. Everybody is going to be here after this, so if you have some questions, if you wanted to know how to get in touch with them a little bit more, with an email or a phone number, a lot of them are going to be around, so feel free. And the other thing I'll throw out too is, if you're a physician, if you're a clinician, if you're an engineer, find somebody who's maybe in your field who's done it. So a lot of us have leaned on Gene for advice, for example, to say, hey, how did you do it? How can I do it? And they're all in this room. That's a big unique thing about this meeting. When you look around the room, you got startups, engineers, physicians, industry, some patients in the room. So we have a nice mix in this room, and you can leverage that. And it's one of the reasons why I love this meeting. So with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much to the panel.
Tomorrow.